Today's end paper was commonly used in stationery binding, particular springback bindings like this one here. It's cloth hinged and sewn all along. It was also used in library bindings, as pointed out by authors such as Lawrence Town. I'm going to show an example of a tight-back library binding in a moment. It's not surprising this end paper is used on library bindings, as library bindings and stationery bindings have a lot in common, both being sewn on tapes and board attachment through split boards. Here's a diagram of the end paper, but it's easier to follow by having a look at one. By magic of video, here's the finished product. And at the front we have a folio of white, which I've used printer's waste. And here's the second folio of white. I'll demonstrate that with some actual folios of white. So here's one, and then the other. And these will be hinged together with a strip of cloth, and then a decorative paper is then put over the top. I'm completely out of marbled paper, so this fancy moustached paper will do to demonstrate. Now the outermost waste sheet becomes the lever. So you can see the lever on this project underway, so there it is there. And that's constructed by pasting the tapes down onto the waste, well, underneath a stiffener. So here's a piece of manila stiffener. Paste the tapes down and then fold the waste back on itself, and that becomes the lever. The spring is then put over the spine, and then the lever is inserted into split boards. And one of the final steps in the construction of a springback is to paste down the outer sheet with the marble on it, which is the paste down obviously, and thus why that outer white can be a printer's waste, because it's not seen. So to get started we need all our materials, so we'll get our whites together, 2 clean ones and 2 waste sheets if you've got them, to save a couple of clean white sheets, some marbled paper, a strong cloth strip, and then another cloth strip, usually a bit thinner, to hinge around the back to reinforce the end paper. So we'll start by folding the whites. The colours or marbles need to be trimmed in two, they're not folded. You want them to be oversized and then trim them up after they've been pasted down. It's a good idea to keep the continuous sheets together so that it's easier to match the patterns across the centre of the end paper later. So we start by pasting the strips of cloth, just cut them closer to length to make it a bit easier, and mark the center if you're no good at judging the center, which I'm not particularly good at, so I'm going to mark them. Glue out the strips of cloth and then give them a minute or two to let them relax to make them easier to work with. Start by pitching the outer folio, the waste side folio, to the center line. And the text side folio, just leave a gap of about 2 millimeters. Now fold it over so that the exposed bit of cloth is on the text side of the end paper. Now we'll put the outer reinforcing strip. I'm using a lighter weight starched calico for this. I'll trim them to length like I did the others. And I'll be a bit impatient here, and I'll not give them long enough to relax. If I just gave it a couple of minutes, then I wouldn't have to muck around with trying to weight them to stop them curling. Though this starched calico just seems to have a mind of its own. So pitch the end paper so there's about 10 millimeters to wrap around to the text side, so it'll completely cover the exposed piece of cloth on that text side. Now catch the second end paper up to the same stage. I'm just going to give them a nip for a few minutes. I'm not going to nip them too hard in the press. Now we're going to glue down the coloured sheets. I've looked at a lot of springbacks in the archives, and I like the exposed cloth to be about an inch wide, so I'm just going to lightly score a mark that I'm going to use to pitch to, about 15 millimeters from the center crease, so it's slightly over an inch in total. This exposed strip is in line with the literature, well, Vaughan and Mason. Now I'm wishing I'd kept track of the pattern across the marbled papers. To paste down these marbles, I want to put most of the adhesive on the whites, so if there is any curl, it is into the book, that it hugs the book. So I'm going to put a little strip of adhesive, and I'm using a 50-50 paste PVA mix. I'm going to put a strip on the edge of the marble, but then glue out the full white. And I'll get close to the crease mark, but I won't go quite up to it, and that's why I needed the adhesive on the marble. So it's fairly easy to pitch to the line and then roll the marble down onto the white, just making sure there's no creases or air bubbles. The literature is lacking detail on how to do this step. Peter Goodwin in his video actually does it as the very final step after he's pasted down the end papers. But I don't know if that was how he usually did it or whether it was just for that particular job and he's not around anymore to ask. Most of the instructions seem to imply that you paste out the colour, and I don't like that approach because you potentially have the end paper curling out. So I was very pleased to find Arthur Green's instructions where he does exactly what I'm doing now. Interleave with blotting paper and then put them in the press. Change the blotting paper a few times overnight and they're ready to use the next day. I quickly catch up the second end paper. Trimming up the excess coloured makes sewing on the end papers to the text block much easier. Position the end papers correctly on the text block. I will use the same jig that I use to punch the holes in the sections to put the holes in the end papers. Now it's a fairly simple matter to sew on the end papers, just sewing around the tapes. I'll do a video on sewing the spring backs because I do this reinforcing of the kettle stitches. Here's a close-up of the reinforced kettle stitch, which is a technique that I really like doing. The last step I'll show is tipping on the first and last sections and the end papers. Between the first and last sections, I'm only going to put a very narrow strip of adhesive so that they can open up flat. But between the end paper and the first and last sections, I'm going to put a 15mm wide strip so that the cloth reinforcing is hidden. I'll address stiff pages in a future video or project. And that's the end papers done for this book.